Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this December 30th, 2016 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can listen to my show every evening, Monday through Friday, 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Pacific Time. They also play the show at 11 a.m., and if you can't get it there, go to my long-standing website at arcticbeacon.com, and you can get shows going back over a decade regarding what I call the Vatican-led New World Order. Okay, just when you think you've heard it all about the Vatican and the Jesuits, something comes up and it just shocks the conscience. And did you know that the Vatican used to castrate choir boys so their voices would stay high? And this practice went on for a long, long time. I'm going to get into that story a little later. And there's a number of other little dirty secrets regarding the Vatican and the pedophile rings and all of this nonsense that they put on us in this world. And you're going to hear about 5 or 6 dirty little secrets about the Vatican. Now, you know I've been covering a story regarding Tony Alamo, a minister, a pastor, that's been jailed for 175 years for crimes he didn't commit. The Vatican accused him of child abuse. They never proved it in court. There was no child abuse. I've known this guy. I've known this ministry for over a decade, and there's no child abuse going on. But he's still in jail for 175 years. They've kidnapped children. And you know something? They never could find any child abuse on the children either, but they did it anyway. And this was Vatican-led, because this ministry talked about the Vatican in the book of Revelations and how they were the Antichrist organization. And plus, Tony talked about the things we talk about on this show, how the Vatican controls our political, our foreign and domestic policies, and much, much more. So they had to keep him quiet because he was very, very popular all over the world, as he really made it a point to send out millions and millions of brochures all over the world, so they had to shut him up. And that's just a case I like to talk about and then compare it to what this Vatican organization is all about. And I've got another dirty, when you see, for example, talking about them kidnapping these Alamo children. Did you know that the Vatican, how many times, if you go to my stories regarding the Duplessis orphans and what they used to do there, I did many shows on that years ago, and that occurred in Canada. And what they would do is they would take children out of a Catholic orphanage. How they got there is anybody's guess. But the nuns there would sign papers that they were mentally ill, insane, when they weren't, and then they would toss them into a nearby insane asylum, and they would basically, many of them were killed. They were used as guinea pigs. And in fact, I had on my show a person, there were about 3,000 Duplessis orphan survivors, and you can look up that story. And I've talked to many, many people. Rod Vanneau, who was a leader in that group, whose wife was one of those that fortunately escaped. And I even interviewed a guy that was alive, and his job was to take the dead babies in a wheelbarrow and take them out and bury them in a place they called the pigsty. That's what this group is about. Well, I've got more information today on some of the other things they used to do with children. And when you compare it to the Alamo ministry, this is what they do. They blame Christians, and we talked about Christian persecution this week. And I talked on many, many shows how basically Christians are being persecuted all over the world. And I spent a good portion of the week discussing that. So I did want to do this. Let me read you the Jesuit quote of the day, and then I want to do a little bit on the Alamo story, and then get into these 5 dirty secrets, a number of dirty secrets that, boy, I just found out about. Incredible stuff. And you'll always find more on these people. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And then we allow our government. And you don't think they're connected? When the Pope comes over here and addresses Congress as if he's the king of the world, addresses the UN, and all of our leaders bow down to him as if he's Christ on earth, when he in fact is Lucifer? Let me read this Jesuit quote. This came from Count, I usually do that every day, so let me read one here. Count von Hornsbrock, 1911, German noble and ex-Jesuit. He said this: "The Jesuit order, therefore, stands before us at the embodiment of a system which aims at the temporal political domination through temporal political means embellished by religion, which assigns to the head of the Catholic religion, the Roman Pope, the role of the temporal overlord, and under shelter of the Pope King, and using him as the instrument, desires itself to attain the dominion over the whole world." And I said to myself, isn't it interesting? If you go back to all these quotes you find about the Jesuits and how they've been kicked out of over 80 countries in the world, you don't hear any of these. It was always coming from statesmen, from people in top levels of government. But now in the last 100 years, maybe a little bit less, you don't hear anything from the top leaders, and that just tells me they're all controlled by them. So let me get back to this Tony Alamo story for a minute. Okay, during my research and my coverage of this story, which basically I probably went in depth on this story more than I have on any other story in my life, it came to my attention that a number of FBI agents were hired to infiltrate this church and then try to frame them for having drugs, weapons, porno, things like that. I interviewed John Peeler, who was one who basically an FBI agent hired. He's also given sworn testimony, sworn affidavits that he was hired to do this. He quit the FBI and basically told this story of what he was told to do, which basically shows this was a frame job. Now, in Tony's criminal trial in 2008, he wasn't allowed to testify, and either were a lot of others, a couple other FBI agents that also gave sworn affidavits that they were hired to frame him. Now, Peeler has said that Tony was squeaky clean. Now, recently, I've had John on my show many times. One of the interesting factors on the show is they basically have framed his son for a murder charge. His son sits in jail now for a murder he didn't commit. He was in the United States Army, and I've discussed that story. But recently I got a letter that John Peeler sent to Pastor Tony Alamo, and he, like I said, is the former FBI agent, and he sent this, and in it he says, this is about Clinton, the Pope, and I, and this is a recent article that Tony wrote. And this is what John said. He said, God bless World Pastor Tony Alamo. Your 4-page volume was 100% correct. That's that article I've read on this show. When Bill Clinton found out that you were against the Catholic Church, Bill Buford and Glenn Jordan, ATF agents who took part in the Waco raid, wanted me to befriend and find out about you and your church. And I was asked to frame you and your church members in any way I could and to kill you if possible. After talking to the people running your stores and businesses and churches, I told all the federal judges and agents that you were squeaky clean, and I refused to kill you. A few weeks before you were arrested, the last time, I told you on a radio talk and internet talk show that the U.S. feds were going to frame you for child porn and other child offenses, and that was on my show prior to that raid on the Alamo ministry in 2008. Peeler goes on to say, I killed many people, and I hope most of them really deserved it. I have repented of my New World Order job, and I thank God that I did not kill you. The New World Order is upset that Chelsea Clinton married a Jewish businessman that used the Clinton Foundation as his piggy bank. You need to read the book Crossfire by L.D. Brown. I'm in stage 2 cancer right now. Please say a prayer for me and John Christopher Peeler, and that's his son who sits in prison right now for a crime he didn't commit. Interesting stuff. Okay, let's get back to these 5 dark and dirty secrets that, I've known about some of this stuff in the Vatican. And before I get into this, it's important that you understand that I came from the mainstream media, and I happened to work in Rome, and I grew up as a Catholic. And most of the things that I talk about today started because I researched them and saw them with my own eyes in the Vatican. Actually, the reason I began to look into the pedophilia and satanic worshiping in the Vatican was through a girl I met who was in she must have been in her mid-20s at the time, that basically was from a very wealthy Illuminati elite family from northern Italy. And she had to witness these child sacrifice in the catacombs of the Vatican. I didn't believe her at the time. But as I began to research stories about the duplicity and the deception of the Jesuits, how they basically were involved in so many scandals. The Vatican, I was there during the Vatican bank scandal, murder, corruption, money laundering, you name it. Not to mention how they were, even during that period of time in the 80s, when a book earlier came out called The Masonic Legacy, basically written by a couple journalists that I even came to Rome. I had the opportunity to not basically interview them, but I knew who these two guys were. And one turns out to be a head editor of a Masonic magazine from London. And this book was basically there to say that the bloodline of Christ still lives. Jesus never died on the cross. And his bloodline exists in a group called the Priori di Sion. Their headquarters was in France. I went to find out who this guy was, found out it was a fraud, and that the Jesuits were behind it. And how did I find that out? Well, secret societies don't tell you their secrets, but I talked to a couple of priests, higher level priests, that made me understand how this all operates. It was under the guise that I never say anything about who they were. I gave them, at the time, these stories were not going to get published anywhere. I was doing it for my own information. And as it moved on, as the years went on, I began to research this even more and found out how blind America was to all of these stories and how blind they are today. Now, as you look on the internet, you see more and more people catching on to this. So I'm always looking for new websites, new videos where people are catching on with information that I wasn't aware of. This is one of them. And I want to play this for you. And we're going to talk. I will interpret a few things and give you some of my background and things that I learned over the years. But you're going to find this quite interesting. Okay, this comes off a channel called Superlatives. And it states here, the Catholic Church has been and continues to be one of the most powerful organizations in the world. Discover the darker sides of the Church on my videos. So this is a guy who calls himself Superlatives. And he starts out with this incredible story about how the Vatican used to castrate choir boys. And let's start here.
This is by Alessandro Moreschi, the last known castrati to have ever lived. Before the 1700s, essentially all Western music compositions were religious. This was a large market for the Catholic Church, as all choir boys were the product of the Vatican Catholic Church. In order to preserve and capitalize on these young men's voices, a common practice began to take place. They began castrating boys. With the peak of popularity around the 18th century, boys aged 7 to 9 were forcefully castrated, meaning their genitals were cut off. They were then known as castrates, or in English, castrados. Boys were drugged to the point of barely being conscious and then placed in a hot bath. Operations had an incredible mortality rate of about 80%. This was done in order to stop the maturing of their singing voices. These boys would grow to have the lungs of men while having the vocal range and voice of a prepubescent boy. Priests are said to have offered money to parents of talented children for the privilege of performing this horrific procedure. It is rumored that priests would go as far to tell parents that if any suspicion arose among family and or friends, to tell them that the boy had been in an accident with a wild boar. The Sistine Chapels still continue to use castrated boys until 1903, the last of which being Alessandro Moreschi.
Isn't that unbelievable? And I'm going to play a little bit more on a second video he did to talk a little bit more about this same story. So let me pod that up right now. But just when you think you've heard it all, you've heard all the Vatican atrocities and just crazy practices, one sticks out, and boy, this is an amazing story. Okay, here we go.
The dark history of castration within the Catholic Church. The most common are the castrates, where talented choir boys aged 7 to 9 were castrated in an attempt to preserve their prepubescent voices. Shockingly, while 1903 saw the last time a castrate was used, castration among the church didn't end there. Astonishing reports surfaced in 2012 which would reveal that the Dutch Roman Catholic Church continued to castrate boys as recently as 1950. They did it as a treatment for homosexuality. One such case was Hank Heathius, who as a child was castrated when he reported his sexual abuse by a priest. Hank was then sent to a Catholic hospital, not to treat the abuse he had endured, however to castrate him for the treatment of his homosexuality. This despite the fact that he himself was the one who was molested. His castration was also a form of punishment from the church for his exposing of the priest that had abused him. Hank went on to suffer from severe psychological and hormonal disorders as a result of being castrated. In his early 20s, he planned a legal campaign against his abusers for their crimes. Before he could bring them to justice, however, he died in a suspicious car accident at the age of 23. All his files, as well as the documents he had against the church, were confiscated and destroyed. Before his death, he had been quoted as saying that he feared they will get a hold of me again. These reports went even further to expose that government officials themselves were often present as these castrations took place. A total of 10 boys are known to have been castrated by the Dutch Catholic Church for their homosexuality. These are only the known cases. These horrific documents showcase a truly dark history within the church.
Unbelievable. I'm going to continue on with this, and this is 5 dark, dirty secrets of the Catholic Church. Very interesting. Okay, let's continue on.
It is by no means a secret in today's society that the Catholic Church has had a severe problem internally in terms of pedophilia. However, the widespread knowledge of this wasn't always the case. In fact, child abuse within the church really only came to light as recently as the 1980s. This is an astonishing fact considering that for decades the church has covered up thousands of child abuse cases. In 2002, the Boston Globe would bring the problem to the forefront when they blew the lid on a horrendous child abuse case within the church. Among the worst are John Jogan, who molested up to 130 different boys, and Lawrence Murphy, who raped a staggering 200 disabled and deaf boys. Proof of the disgraceful view the church has on pedophilia lies among the punishment Lawrence Murphy received. which was none. That's right, not only was he not punished, he wasn't even fired. On top of that, when he passed away, he was buried with the full honors of a Holy Roman Catholic priest. These are just two of over 3,000 priests who have been accused around the world of child molestation in the last 50 years alone. A statement released by Pope Francis himself in 2014 revealed that pedophilia within the church is at about 2%. This is an incredible number, meaning that it is 1 in 50 priests. In other words, with the estimated 414,000 priests active globally, there are about 8,286 pedophile priests active right now, of which nearly half most likely reside within the United States. Most of these priests will never see punishment, as the covering up of these crimes internally has allowed for enough time for the statute of limitations to run out.
Okay, we have about 3 minutes, and I'm going to continue with some more of these dark, dirty Vatican secrets in the second half hour. But let me say this, let me make a comment. In that last segment, we heard that one priest, that priest Murphy, of all the boys that it was proven to molest, he never was punished, never was sent to jail, never and even died and was never even fired from his job as a priest. And how many other of these these priests are walking around doing the same thing today, while Tony Alamo, who never did anything, a Christian minister, sits in jail for 175 years. That's why, go to his a website I started called FreeTonyAlamo.com, and you can then go to the look above on the top of the site, hit the petition, and sign a petition that we're going to give to the pardon attorney of Trump and try to get Tony out of prison. And next week I'll be doing a couple more stories on this. And you can go back into my archives and get many stories regarding how Christians are being persecuted, how the Alamo ministry here is being persecuted. And I think you'll find it really astonishing. And when you compare it to what I'm just playing you today, not to mention all the other stories we've done about these Vatican and Jesuit atrocities, genocides, etc., etc. It's just amazing to me when stories like this, is the Pope going to say this is hate speech? When they're proven stories? When there's proof that these things have happened and just been covered? What about that kid that they killed? Another dead body on a story that they want to cover up. How many more have there been that we don't know about? And how can we say that our government doesn't know this? Our leaders of the world don't know this. They know it and they work with them. Otherwise, our Congress wouldn't allow this man to step foot in our country, the Pope. And they adore this guy. They make him out to be the king of the world. So who do you think they work for? And what do you think they're involved with? Pizzagate is nothing, folks. That opened the eyes of some people of what really goes on, but that was orchestrated as well, whether it goes on there or not. That's just a small little part of this worldwide problem. And it all boils down to all roads lead to Rome. And we'll be back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal on this December 30th, 2016 day on our calendar. And this is the last show of this year. And I will see you again in 2017, right? Well, anyway, let's continue with some of these dark, dirty secrets of the Vatican and Jesuit order. And I might add, we're going to start out with Franco. Now, over the years, I've done stories about the Vatican-Jesuit connection to Stalin, the Vatican-Jesuit connection to Hitler, the genocide by the Jesuits in the Vatican in Yugoslavia, etc., covering that famous court case, Alperin v. Vatican Bank, which you can go to my website and find out, that was dismissed after just clear evidence. The Vatican was involved in money laundering gold and involved in the genocide in Croatia. Unbelievable story. And the courts here just threw the case out. Incredible. But anyway, I've been over the years looking at all this. Now, let's look at, I've overlooked Franco a bit. So let's see what this guy who put, another thing about the information that comes out against the Vatican. I find it's just that's a nice thing about the internet. Although you got to weed through a lot of controlled opposition stuff and websites, they start, the Vatican, etc., to basically confuse you. But what I find is that a lot of the good research is done just by average people, just everyday people that want to get to the truth. And the reason is the truth really is simple, folks. It's not that complicated. What's complicated is when these organizations start lying. Lying gets complicated and confusing. That's what's the confusion. The truth is real easy. You can find the truth in the Bible. You can find it on the internet if you look hard enough. And I find that it comes from a lot of just average people who want to get to the truth. And I think we'll continue with what was going on in Spain. Here we go.
In the 1930s, Francisco Franco successfully led a rebellion military to overthrow Spain's democratic republic. He would go on to rule Spain and establish a brutal dictatorship. He had in plan a mind to purify Spain. One way in which he believed to achieve this was to steal babies and prevent deemed undesirable parents from raising their newborns. As the Catholic Church ran most of the schools, hospitals, and orphanages at the time, Franco got in close ties with the Church. Nuns working within hospitals ran by the Church would take mothers' newborn babies out of the room for an examination, where they would then swap the child with an already dead baby kept on ice. They would then return with a dead baby and convince the mother that their child had passed away. These children were then taken and either placed in Catholic orphanages or sold in illegal profit-making adoptions, of which all profits went to the Church. When Franco died in 1975, the Church could have stopped these actions. However, they continued stealing babies until at least 1987. It is remarkable to think of the impact that this has had on thousands of people within Spain. These children ended up living completely different lives than they may have. 15% of all children adopted from 1960 to 1989 were stolen babies or sold into the child trafficking trade.
Unreal. Unreal.
Enjoying it.
Okay, sorry for that mix-up. Somebody once told me, because when I play a video, there's a way to block these stupid commercials, and I never put the program on, so I have to do that for next year. We'll get back to this in a second. Okay, sorry for that interruption. Here we go.
Into the child trafficking trade. This is Sister Abaya, who on March 27, 1992 went missing. Under her fridge was a single slipper that belonged to her, but aside from that, nothing else was found. It wasn't long before her body was found in a nearby well. Upon investigation, it was deemed that she had committed suicide, and the case was closed. 16 years later, in 2007, the case was reopened by the Central Bureau of Investigation. This came at the request of over 60 nuns working where Sister Abaya herself had worked. They believed suicide was not the cause of her death. 3 individuals, Father Pathuru Kayil, Father Thomas M. Couture, and Sister Sefi were all interviewed under a narco-analysis, which is a serum test. With the serum at work, all 3 made a shocking confession. They revealed that they had murdered Sister Abaya in a joint effort. So what could possibly motivate not 1, but 3 members of the church to commit such a crime? Sister Abaya had walked in on all 3, naked. A panicked Sister Sefi then grabbed an axe, hitting Sister Abaya 3 times over the head, killing her. All 3 then proceeded in throwing her body down a well, the well in which she had been found. Investigators working the case have claimed that there are invisible hands manipulating the case behind the scenes. It starts with the initial evidence found at the crime scene. For some odd reason, all the evidence, including Sister Abaya's personal diary, her veil, the slipper, and other key evidence has went missing. Multiple investigators working the case have mysteriously resigned from their positions. Some have had their careers ruined, and others have even committed suicide. There is a strong belief that there is pressure from the Catholic Church, who is manipulating this case with their vast resources and money. As a result, all 3 suspects have yet to be charged, as a trial hasn't been able to take place due to the evidence disappearing.
Now that's unreal, but that story reminds me of a couple things that went on. Remember the story we did about Sister Charlotte? And you can go find her testimony on the web. But it's an incredible story where she escaped a cloistered monastery, a cloistered nunnery and talked about torture, sex slavery, nuns being killed, being abused by priests, and amazing story. Reminded me of that. Incredible story. So go find Sister Charlotte. Let's continue with these deep and dark, dirty secrets.
The Church has always had a strong stance on sexuality and sex outside of marriage. Therefore, it comes as no surprise that there's a dark history involving the treatment of women. Beginning in the 18th century and taking place mainly in Ireland, the Church imprisoned many women involved in prostitution, even if only suspect and those deemed as promiscuous. They were placed in asylums to get treatment for their sins. As proof of the vast power the Church holds over many, a large magnitude of these women were placed in these asylums by their own families. Inside the asylums, the women were forced into intense labor for 7 days a week. Their work gained a hefty profit for the Church, as the laundries were run for profit. Around 30,000 women were sent to these asylums, where they were often sexually abused, beat, and had horrific living conditions. Running from the 18th to the 20th century, this history of the Church was incredibly only revealed in 1993, when over 150 bodies were found buried in a mass grave in Ireland. The Church had buried these women secretly, without notifying families or authorities, as none had death certificates. Unsurprisingly, the Catholic Church has once again not apologized.
That's totally another story that reminds me of is the story regarding the Duplessis orphans. And he discusses this, and we're going to continue with that in a minute. He touches on the Duplessis orphans next. But I did want to mention that not only did we do the Duplessis orphan story in the past, we talked about the Jesuit mission schools and how the genocide of the Native Americans took place there. Many killed at these schools, beaten, abused. And remember the testimony of one woman we had on this show years ago, who was a Native American, as a child witnessed a Catholic priest burying a dead baby underneath the altar in one of the churches on these mission schools in the northwest part of the United States. This also went on, and we did the stories about the genocide of the Canadian natives and the schools that were going on in Canada, just like they were here, run by the Jesuits, sanctioned by our government, of course. And it just goes on and on. In fact, remember when we discussed, we had Ken Bearchief on, and this is just recently, in the last, 8 years, the Tamaki law firm got huge settlements regarding these atrocities that went on at the Native American schools. It was over a $200 million settlement on one of the cases up in the Northwest. So this stuff is all verified. It is not fake news, folks. The Pope and our mainstream media and our government would like to see the end of these stories. They don't want this stuff out because it really reveals what they are. It's Luciferian satanic worship at the highest levels of all of our institutions. You don't believe the number of people influenced by the Jesuitism and the education they brought to this school, the schools here. Now, as far as these orphanages, we're going to get to the Duplessis orphans. But let me tell you a personal story. And this happened to me. Now, I told you the story. My mother died of leukemia and left behind my brother, who was 6 months old at the time, and I was 10. And my mother, I was at St. John Brebeuf Parish in Chicago. And afterwards, my dad had spent all of his money on, taking care of my mother. And he was just rebuilding a business, starting a new trucking company. And we received a visit. This was shortly after my mother died. We received a visit from one of the top priests in the diocese. My dad figured he came over to help us. But when I was sitting in the room holding my brother, and I listened to my dad, and the priest said, "I think, Tony, it would be a good idea that we put your sons in an orphanage." Why, as soon as that word came out, my dad got up, grabbed him, threw him out the door, and said, "Never step foot in this my house again." So that's what they were. Could you imagine if my dad would have succumbed to this? They were going to put me and my little brother in an orphanage. Where would we end up? You know what's happening. What about the Duplessis orphans? You don't think this stuff still goes on? Where are all those kids on the missing, milk cartons? Where are they at? Now, my dad never sent my brother to a Catholic school again. Well, when he grew up, he went into a Lutheran school. And I continued on because I'd lost my mother, and he figured I didn't want to leave because of my friends. So I told that story before. But when I started doing the Duplessis orphan story, that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to get to the bottom of what they were doing. And it had something to do with a personal experience in my life. Okay, so let's see what he has to say about the Duplessis orphans.
In the 1930s and 40s, federal subsidies for mental hospitals were much larger than those given to orphanages. Premier Maurice Duplessis saw this as an opportunity to make money. After getting the support from the provincial church, he, as well as the Catholic Church, went on a corruption spree. See, the Catholic Church at the time ran most of the mental hospitals as well as the orphanages in the area. Together, they then began to systematically diagnose children in orphanages with mental diagnosis that they did not have. This, in turn, led to the children being sent to psychiatric institutions, which, remember how I said that mental hospitals received higher subsidies for each patient? Well, this meant that they would now receive much more money per child, as the church owned both orphanages as well as the mental hospitals these children were now sent to. Either way, it meant that the church made more money. This led to horrifying conditions for children. Some orphanages were completely emptied out after every child was diagnosed with a mental disorder. The orphanage was then turned into a mental hospital, so the church again saw a higher profit. Horribly, some of the orphans weren't even orphans. They were children forcefully taken from their mother, as the church had a strong stance on children conceived outside of marriage. Many children were sexually abused, were used for experiments, tests, and received electric shock therapy. In the end, around 20,000 children were falsely diagnosed with mental disorders, of which many died. Eventually, among the surviving orphans, some told their stories to the Quebec government, who gave out settlements. However, it is the Catholic Church who to this day has not apologized or even acknowledged these acts. Easter Sunday is a widely celebrated holiday by the Catholic Church as the resurrection of Jesus Christ. It is typically the most attended service every year among churchgoers. In 1980, the night before Easter, Sister Margaret Ann Paul, a nun working in the chapel of Toledo Mercy Hospital, was found wrapped in a cloth, brutally murdered inside the chapel. Her arms were crossed on her chest. It was evident by a smear of blood on her forehead that the last rites had been performed on her. The last rites is a common ritual within the Catholic Church known as the last prayer given shortly before death. Near her heart was what appeared to be an upside-down cross shaped by stab wounds. Father Gerald Robinson, who was the chapel's priest, became an immediate suspect, and while being interviewed by police, a district under the care of a bishop walked in and abruptly stopped the interview. For some odd reason, the priest was never questioned by police again. 23 years went by, with nothing. Then, in 2003, a letter labeled Survivor Doe showed up at a local police station. This letter stated that Doe had been sexually abused during a satanic ritual led by a priest and multiple people dressed as nuns. The priest involved was none other than Father Gerald Robinson, After the raiding of his office, it led to the discovery of a small saber-shaped tool believed to be the murder weapon. Upon further investigation, police deemed that Father Gerald Robinson had been the murderer, and he was later convicted in May of 2006 before passing away in 2014, meaning for his crime he served just 8 years. In the 1920s, the Catholic Church built a home in Ireland for unmarried mothers to be run by the Sisters of Bon Secours. For over 36 years, this home took thousands of women who were labeled by the Church as fallen women. Because sex outside of marriage was seen as a mortal sin, the Church used this home, built behind 8-foot walls, to deliver the woman's children, as well as to commit their crimes. These newborn children were then taken away from their mothers and put into nurseries where infection, measles, and many sicknesses were quick to spread. When one baby got sick, it often meant that most children in the nursery did as well. Doctors were never present in this home, as the Church believed that any pain the woman endured during birth was God's punishment for the sins she had committed, as well as any sickness the child got. Nuns completely neglected these children. When bodies began to pile up, the nuns began to use an out-of-use septic tank located behind the home to crowd in dead babies. When the home shut down in 1961, the nuns left to go on to different churches, but the gruesome evidence of their acts were left behind. 11 years after they left, local fishermen digging for worms made a grisly discovery. Over 800 baby skulls as well as their bodies were found in a septic tank used as a mass grave. It is believed that there may have actually even been a few of the women left in the unmarked grave as well. It is now speculated that these mass burials used by the Catholic Church could be located all throughout Europe. They are just yet to be discovered. During the Second World War, Nazi Germany's genocide targeted all Jews, which meant all children of Jewish descent were not spared. As a way to save thousands of these children, the Catholic Church took steps by issuing false baptism certificates identifying Jewish children as Catholic children. While most of these baptism certificates were false documents, France actually baptized many of these children and then put them in Catholic schools as well as orphanages to hide them. This in itself should have went down as a great part of the Catholic Church's history. However, when the war ended, the Catholic Church issued a directive across the entire Catholic community, forbidding its members and fellow churches to return these Jewish children back to their parents. Some of these children were never even told of their Jewish descent and were told that their parents had died. They were so young that they had no other memory other than that of being in a Catholic orphanage. While some children were eventually given back, it is still not clear to this day how many Jewish children were given back and how many were actually saved.
Okay, like I said before, just when you thought you heard it all, something comes up that just shocks your conscience again about this evil organization. And I think it's appropriate to end the year with this kind of story. I want to thank this guy for putting some of that together. A lot of documented evidence that can't, well, they ignore it, they refute it. But folks, this stuff goes on, and it goes on today. And we've been trying to show this for years on this show. And hopefully more and more people are starting to get out of the beast. So with the year ending, I just wanted to say this, that next year we'll be doing all kinds of new shows, all kinds of different things that I want to bring to you next year, as well as presenting this petition to release a man who's been framed by the Vatican organization and our government officials, Bill Clinton, etc. And we're going to present that petition to the pardon attorney for Trump and see if we can release an innocent man. As far as other things, there's other Christian ministries in this country that are being persecuted as we speak, and many of my stories talked about that over the years. And one thing I do want to say to all you listeners, please research a lot of this stuff on your own. If anything comes to your attention that you think I'd be interested in, contact me at Greg Beacon, that's GregBeacon.com. And I guess people have always asked me, and I just want to end the show this way, why did you name your website Arctic Beacon? Well, next year I'm going to tell you why I did that. And it has a lot to do with the flat earth theory. Yes, I've covered that story, and we'll be doing a little bit about that next year as well. Also, let me give out that website, freeTonyAlamo.com. And you can go read about it. I got a short little analysis of what happened to this ministry and what happened to Tony. And also, at the top, you can click on the petition. You can sign it, leave a comments. There's been great comments from many people all around the world regarding Tony. Many understand that he's been framed. And let's see if we can shake up the Trump administration next year to see if he's going to live up to. He says he wants to allow Christians a bigger voice. He's tired of what's happened to Christians in this country. Well, let's see if he will put action where his promises were on his campaign trail. We'll be back next year on the Investigative Journal. Have a good weekend and a good New Year's. See you next Monday.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.